Wow, I can't believe I'm about to say this. The first team we're going to be talking about, all right, in the offseason, previewing for the 2024 season is the Arizona Wildcats. Yes, I'm talking about those Arizona Wildcats, 10-3 Arizona Wildcats with Jed Fish. Jed Fish is gone. Insert Brent Brennan. And if you haven't already, check out our Brent Brennan video. We did a whole thing on that when he got hired. Moral of the story is it's a pretty dang good hire. It's a pretty dang good hire. And you know what? The staff that he put around him is very reputable. Am I wrong in saying
Let's
that?
let's get into the staff right now. I mean, starting first of all, Brent Brennan. Let's give him his flowers, right? He comes over from San Jose State after 7 years there, right? Three bowl games, which by the way does not sound, super impressive. But if you're not plugged into San Jose State or you're not plugged into Mountain West, that is super, super impressive, right? He was the 2020 Mountain West champions, right? I know it was COVID year, but they had it worse than maybe, most schools that they were also playing against with the California rules as well. And yeah, he is incredible. It's kind of a late hire. If you can remember, so much has happened. If you can remember back to January, right? You had a couple different, Matthew did a short on it. You had some domino effect there with the Nick Saban leaving. And so you had obviously Kalen DeBoer come from Washington to go to Alabama. And then that Washington job opens up. Jed Fish comes from Arizona to Washington to go to the Big Ten, believe it or not. And then Brent Brennan comes from San Jose State to Arizona. And a lot happened. Arizona was coming off building a fantastic season in 2023 when they went 10-3 and did a lot of things with Fafita and a couple other young guys. And it was a pretty, I don't want to say doomsday, but it was scary, very volatile time to be an Arizona Wildcat fan. And Brent Brennan kind of righted the ship. He brought back a couple players. He put together a really good staff, which
Oh
we can get
yeah.
into right now.
Oh yeah. Well, let me bring up Dino Babers, right? So he hires Dino Babers as the offensive coordinator, and you probably remember him. Oh, wait, he coached so he coached at Syracuse, right? And you're gonna look at this staff, and we're gonna talk about guys, it's kind of the graveyard of coaches that actually recently got fired this past year. But he runs the veer and shoot offense, right? And that stemmed from Art Briles at Baylor, right? If you remember how effective that offense was, and there were a bunch of coaches that kind of came off that tree. Directly, the first branch of that tree is Dino Babers,
Yep.
right? And when we talk about really good offensive coordinators in college football, right, we also talk about Sean Lewis, right? Sean Lewis comes from the Dino Babers tree of Art Briles. So if you don't believe that Dino Babers can coach offense, uh, you can go listen to another podcast. All right, you can just hang up, hang out, whatever you want. All right,
And
Dino
by the way,
Babers.
you're going to look at the numbers real quick to interrupt you. You're going to look at the numbers this past season for Syracuse. It was awful. The injuries they dealt with at the quarterback
Oh
position.
yeah,
It was not reflective of Dino Babers as a coach, as a scheme, as a play caller, all this other stuff. And also at Bowling Green. Bowling Green, he
yeah,
was so good. 18-9. 18-9
yeah.
in 2 years at Bowling Green. Holy
the same
cow. And
the same thing happened to Nick Sheridan at Indiana when Kalen DeBoer was at Indiana, right? He was the offensive coordinator there with the historic season with Michael Penix in 2020. He goes to Fresno State to be the head coach there. Nick Sheridan comes up as the offensive coordinator, and they have the worst historical season by an offense in Indiana history, right? And that, or one of them, right? There are plenty of them, but and then look, he's now the offensive coordinator at Alabama, right? So like, just because there was a bad season that had injuries right around, like Gadsden went down, some of the offensive line went down. Uh, Garrett Schrader was not healthy the entire year. There was just so much that happened. That's not to take away anything of Dino Babers, but I say let's just
and
keep talking about the offense a little bit and like some of these pieces that Dino Babers is
wait,
working with.
can I throw real quick with Dina Babers before we move on from him? He was also, if you are, I don't want to say seasoned, but let's call it veteran and gritty, right? Passionate college football fan. If you're 1995 to 2000, he was back at Arizona. He was wide receiver, running back, offense coordinator for a little bit. And then he went to Eastern Illinois and he coached Jimmy Garoppolo, right? The Jimmy Garoppolo, and molded him into a really good quarterback, which he looks to do with Fafita.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So you're gonna see a lot of blend of like that veer and shoot, RPOs, yada yada yada. It's gonna be awesome. Okay. And Noah Fafita might be the guy to captain it all. We're talking about one of the better quarterbacks for sure in the Big 12. And we have just a sample size of last year. Jaden Delore goes in the season starting. Uh, I believe I don't think did he get hurt in that game, and then they put in Fafita, and then he took over. Either way, however it happened, no Fafita came in and was fantastic. He was fantastic. If he plays that Mississippi State game, they win that game.
Yeah.
And you know, then you're talking about not necessarily being. They wouldn't have been in the college football playoff conversation, but man, like uh, what do you call it? A 10-2 regular season looks a lot different than a 9-3. So crazy, crazy stuff there. But so that's just like the quarterback situation there. Obviously, like it's a very, very, very solid one to be in, right? And that's the name that you're worried about. Okay. They have some other talent there as well, but Noah Fafita is your guy. In running back room, you're looking at, a guy, Quali Conley, right, who was there at Arizona, had some production there, but
He was at San Jose
big
State.
one. Sorry, San Jose State, but he's with Brent Brennan, is what I meant to say. Running back room also includes Shakrori Croskett Merritt, who came from New Mexico. If you remember, he was committed to Ole Miss, and now he flipped over to Arizona. He was 1,000-yard rusher for New Mexico in that offense with Bryant Vincent. Is that right?
New Mexico. Yeah. Would have been Prime Vincent. And
And
also,
Bryant
by the way,
Vincent.
talking about that staff that Brendan put together and the connections just in the running back room itself, Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, New Mexico, his head coach is the now special teams coordinator, Danny Gonzalez for
Yeah.
Arizona. So there's that piece coming together. And the running back coach you're bringing over, right? Brent Brennan's bringing him from San Jose State to Arizona, who developed obviously Kyrie Robinson, stud last year for San Jose State, but he also has that familiarity with Quali Conley. And to me, if you see, your head coach and your position coach bringing over a player, right, that you had experience with, that had playing time and then legit value for your team, that to me is a really good sign and bodes well for this room and this offense.
Yeah. Well, you saw Jonah Coleman get kind of poached from
Yep.
Arizona and Washington. So there was a need in that offense for a running back, and you do need to have a good one, believe it or not. Jordan Washington was also another one that got poached over to Washington. So you you needed a running back, and I think they got two really good ones. I really like
Yeah.
what they have there. At receiver is kind of where their golden jewel is in Ted McMillan, right? Ted McMillan is easily one of the best receivers in the Big 12 in college football. He is phenomenal. He was great last year. Him and Noah Fafita have a very special connection. For me, to me, I have him as a top three receiver in the country, and I don't think that's not even a hot take, right?
No. Do 6'5", 210. I mean, oh my gosh. So much production for 2 years. He is unguardable. He's just about unguardable, right? He is really, really good. And he has shined in a pretty crowded room with other NFL players, right? You've got Jacob Cowing, who just went to the draft this year. Dorian
Yeah.
Singer's over at Utah. He'll be a draft guy this year. We'll talk about them and in Utah once we get to Utah in this thing. But to put McMillan also, he's battling injured right now, which is kind of tough. I mean, you hope that he's back, and I'm kind of assuming, I think we're both kind of going with this, that he will be full 100%. And obviously, predicting injuries or trying to figure out and learn from these college head coaches is just about near impossible. But the reality is, there's a little bit concern in the back of your mind if you're an Arizona fan. But I think I'm not inside or anything, but I do think, feel like reading the tea leaves, it should be okay.
Well, I'll talk about the other receivers in that room as well. Montana Lamonius Craig, right, from Colorado, was a solid player for them last year. If you remember early on in the season, he did very well. The spring game, he was fantastic
Yeah.
as well. So he does his thing there at Colorado. He says, I'm going to move out. He goes to Arizona where there's an immediate opportunity, right? That was that was before last year, right? So this past year, he was pretty good for Arizona. But I think he's ready to take that next jump. And, he's balling to ball out in his final season of college football. The
Yeah.
other good receiver that I really would like to point out is a new transfer from Old Dominion. There was a lot of hype for a different Old Dominion transfer uh, throughout the transfer portal window. And I think people forgot about Raymelo Murphy. And I think this staff really likes what they got here. He had about 500 yards for them in 2023. I guess the interesting connection there, and I can't say that this was for sure. Like, I'm assuming Brent Brennan knew him beforehand because he is originally from San Jose, California, which is something interesting to point out. So I think those three are going to kind of make up your core. You also got Malachi Riley, who's just a young true sophomore there, who's also pretty talented. But I think those three guys, to me, are probably the guys that are going to stand out. But we'll see how that plays out.
Can I throw one more name in there? Speaking of guys returning to or connection to the San Jose area, right? Jeremiah Patterson. He's a wide receiver, JUCO kid that comes over as a junior, right? He is from City College of San Mateo, which, by the way, is about, I don't know, half hour from San Jose State University. He had offers from Kansas State, San Jose State, and Brent Brennan, UNLV, among others, right? He was one of four players who we'll talk about once we get to those positions. Three of those guys were on the defensive side from City College San Mateo to come over in this first, recruiting transfer portal class with Brent Brennan. And he had 90 in 2 seasons, he had 90 receptions, 1,100 yards, 15 touchdowns. He's a pretty good player. And obviously, it's nice you don't have to rely on him as like a reliable, every down, third down, it's got to be him. He's got other players that are ahead of him, but he can kind of ease his way into the Big 12 footing and make a splash play here or there for Arizona.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the offensive line now. I mean, you lose Jordan Morgan to the NFL. This is still a pretty dang good offensive line. You're returning four guys. You're returning maybe two guys that are potential NFL players. And then also at the left tackle, replacing Jordan Morgan, Raymond Polito, right?
Yep, yep, yep,
Who's
yep.
very, very interesting. Again, I guess I don't know if he'll start there. My guess is that he's going to start there. I'm assuming there'll be a position battle there for sure going into the summer. But I mean, he was a highly rated recruit. He was committed to Alabama, and then he flipped over to Arizona pretty late there. So look, there's one thing I know is that Alabama can recruit pretty good offensive linemen, right? So the fact that Arizona was able to land that is dang impressive. Um, yeah, Michael Wooten also is an interesting player to look out for at tackle. I'm assuming he'll also be competing for that spot as well, if not providing some solid depth. And then just, uh, yeah, I mean, also Raymond Paludo, I forgot to mention, is just kind of battled injuries since he's been on campus. So that's part of the reason why he hasn't played and you haven't heard that name. But yeah, and then the interior, like, can those guys on the interior make another jump? I thought they were pretty good last year, but can they? There's some pretty decent interior defensive lines in the Big 12. I will give it some credit there. Can those guys get a push is the question, and give this run game an opportunity with these running backs to really thrive.
Well, yeah, and that O-line coach they're bringing in, right? Brendan's bringing him over from San Jose State. That's Josh Oglesby, right? They did average 5.58 yards per carry in
Yeah, they
2023
did.
there. I
Yeah,
know
they
it's the
did.
Mountain West. I know that, but it's also the talent that you were playing with at San Jose State. It's maybe not as what it is elsewhere in the Mountain West, but also if you got couple experienced guys and you infuse that with some young talent like Pulido, Wendell Moe, who was pretty good last year. Um, yeah, I
Josh
mean, I
Josh
think that's
Baker, Leif.
Baker's old guy, Mankinson, and then I mean, we haven't even talked about, and I'm gonna butcher his name, Jonas Savianea. Uh, it's year 3 now with him. He's got a ton of experience. He's an all Pac-12 type player at right tackle for you, so you feel pretty good at that position. And overall, offensively, before we move on to the defense, I mean, this is considering everything that happened, and you lose a couple guys here and there to the portal. I mean, this is a pretty good job for Brent Brennan and a pretty good situation that they're walking into the Big 12, where you've got a bunch of other good quarterbacks, a bunch of other good offenses, good running backs, receiving cores, blah, blah, blah in the Big 12. I mean, you're coming in and you got just as good, if not better, lineup than most of the teams that you're going to be playing.
Absolutely. Well, and then so Brent Brennan on the defensive side of the ball, he hires Dwayne Akina. Okay. Dwayne Akina is no slouch. All right. He's not. What also is nice too is, believe it or not, Arizona actually kept a large part of this defensive unit together. And just like Johnny Nansen did, right? Dwayne Akina is going to be running a 4-2-5 for this Arizona team. So I would imagine not a Giants philosophy shift right there. Um, I mean, I think Johnny Nansen at Texas, is he not going to be running a 4.25 with the boys over there? Either way, I think we're going to be looking at a nice and easy shift over there. I mean, you're looking at a pass rush that's really interesting because they brought in like a ton of guys there. I'm not sure if we're going to see one of those guys at least really stand out, but it was clearly a problem, right? And I would say that the biggest hole in this team is probably that defensive line, right? Maybe that interior, right? Because you lose Savea, right, to Texas, who was a huge reason, along with, Jacob Manu and the linebacking core. They're a huge reason that that defense was so good against the run and why they were able to just camp out on third downs and that secondary just kind of feasted. So I'll say the defensive line is probably my biggest issue with this defense. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
It's just a bunch of transfers. I mean, I'm looking at what, 7 transfers, a JUCO guy coming in from San Mateo, like I talked about earlier. You're getting a mix of Power Five, couple, FCS, and then San Jose State as well. So Trey Smith, you feel good about, right? If you're bringing over a guy that had production for you last year, 8 sacks a year ago at San Jose State, you feel pretty good about what he can do. Maybe the adjustment to the Big 12 might take a couple games and whatnot. But you got to feel that that staff at least has some confidence in him to be able to play with the Big 12. But yeah, I think you nailed it absolutely on the head. You got a couple guys that were key contributors to last year's team that are gone. You got to replace, and you kind of plug in some transfers. To me, I mean, that's never a good recipe if you are relying on,
No,
your whole defensive line. I get it's a new staff. I get that absolutely. But to rely on a whole new staff to, tape together some pieces for you. And we'll see. I mean, who knows, right? It's going to be really tough to say what happens either way. But the feeling right now is it could be one of the reasons that holds the teams back from accomplishing their goals this year. Does that make sense?
oh, I agree. I agree. The linebacking core is really good, right? Jacob Manu was first team All Pac-12. I mean, and he had 35 quarterback pressures playing stand-up linebacker, so he was everywhere in the backfield, especially. So Justin Flo, also, if you remember, he was a kind of a crazy recruit coming out of high school, but he went to Oregon, didn't really work out from there. He's all right. He's a good
He's
football
just
player.
got to stay healthy, and the
Yeah.
talent is there. It's stay healthy, and I think playing next to a guy. So you look at Mono and Flo, right, who are probably going to be your two starters. Maybe Tay Brown if he takes a step in year two, but like Mono is 5'11", 225, right? Good, gritty, Big 12 college linebacker with a pro potential. Maybe might not be there because of that size limitation, but he's going to be in the right spots, right? And he's just a good Big 12 experienced linebacker there for you. Flo is, he is what you picture to be a legit linebacker, right? He's 6'2", 225. He wears it super well. He moves. He's physical. I mean, everyone's seen his highlight. That's not everyone's, but if you haven't, his highlights in high school, you've probably seen them, just not realized it was Justin Flo. But I think it'll be a nice pairing for those two. I think Flo being next to a guy with the experience and leadership of Mono, it can kind of let him do his thing in this new defense. I guess not new, but a new defense coordinator system, I guess, for him with Dwayne Aquina. And Danny Gonzalez, by the way, also special teams coordinator. I believe he's going to be also coaching the linebackers. And so that gives you even more experience on that staff, which is, credit to Brent Brennan for doing that.
Seriously. And then the secondary, I like it, depending on who that second corner is going to be, right? So Davis, we know, is
Oh,
really
yeah.
solid in that cornerback one spot. And you don't really hate the safeties either. You don't really hate the safeties, but like of these transfer guys, right? Is it John Price, the JUCO transfer, Marcus Groves Killebrew, who came from A&M, then Louisville, or is it Demetrius Freeney? Like, if one of those guys can step up and play that cornerback spot at an effectively high level, like we could see we could see a pretty special secondary here, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, I keep mentioning, I know it's not really a huge deal, but I keep mentioning College San Mateo, right? That's John Price and Demetrius Freeney. I mean, John Price comes from 2023. He was at JUCO college there. Freeney was in 2022, was at San Mateo. He transferred out to Miami, didn't quite put it together there, but had a really, really nice JUCO season. Obviously, led to him being a highly recruited and sought after out of the portal. And yeah, like you said, question marks. Not a lot of experience to be thrown on the shoulders of these guys, but
No,
at least they're
and
gonna.
injuries in the case of Marquise Gross Killebrew.
Yeah,
So
dude. At least, I mean, Chip Viney, right? A guy that follows Brennan. That's going to be the cornerbacks coach for them this year. They last year they had a pretty good defense. They were first in pass defense, 12 interceptions uh, by his or by the defense, right? Defensive unit. So you feel pretty good there coaching wise. But these guys, the opposite, Davis, they're going to see targets, right? You're not going to throw at 6'4", 195 stud, one of the better cornerbacks in the Big 12 when you've got these new and unproven guys. And I'm not going to say that they're not going
yeah,
to step up to the occasion, but the reality is you're going to see targets and you're going to know pretty quickly, right? If you're Arizona, right? Week 3 at Kansas State, week 5 at Utah, 6 Texas Tech, and we'll get in their schedule later on, but you're going to have to be ready to play those games if you're going to want to compete for the Big 12 race, just the way that their schedule breaks down.
well, let's talk about their schedule. All right. So you start with New Mexico, then Northern Arizona, then you go to Kansas State, you get a bye, you go to Rice Eccles. That's a tough spot. They've been there before, right? But it's a tough spot. You get Texas Tech at home, at BYU in Provo, right? You get Colorado at home, West Virginia at home, at UCF, then a bye. Then they play Houston at home, at TCU, and then Arizona State at home to finish it off, right? So wins that can kind of chalk up, for them based on their team. Arizona State, Houston, Northern Arizona, New Mexico, right? That's kind of 4.
Oh,
Okay.
Danny Gonzalez revenge game. Boom, 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 boom.
Danny Gonzalez revenge game is so right. He's gonna be pinning folks inside the 5 all day. Uh, BYU going to Provo is never easy, and this BYU team is gonna be pretty physical, I would imagine. Kalani
And
Sitake is really excited about his about sorry, I'll let you continue, but
no, real quick about that BYU game. I mean, none of these players were really, around when they were playing in the same conference, but right, it was a former the WAC, right? We talked about it in our Big 12 media. These guys were in the WAC, the border conference, and when like it's got or not the border conference, that's Texas Tech. I'm sorry. BYU and Arizona were in the WAC together. Not really a rivalry game, but I guess if you want to rekindle old conference, those just another storyline to add to the Big 12 this year.
yeah, absolutely. I like some of the games that they get at home, right? I like the fact that they get Texas Tech at home. I like the fact that they get Colorado at home. I like the fact that they get West Virginia at home. That's a big deal this year. I think West Virginia is pretty good. So their win total is at 8, right? And you and I, for every single one of these teams, right, we're gonna pick over or under, right? Not that we're betting these games. That's for a different video. Make sure you check that out when that's out later on. But these are over under, right? You do or die. I'll tell you, it's juice to the under, believe it or not. The overall 8 win total. If that tells you kind of the direction I'm going, I'm way on the over, man. Give me over 8 wins. Now here's the thing. I think 8-4 is the most likely outcome because the schedule
Mhm.
is pretty tough because you got to go to Utah, right? You got to go to UCF. You have to play at Texas Tech's not easy. You got to go to Manhattan, right? So I do think this is not the easiest schedule in the Big 12, right? You don't get Baylor, you don't get Cincinnati, although you do get BYU, Houston, Arizona State, which is kind of nice. So if you include that, uh, also wait, isn't this Kansas State game? That's not a conference game, is it?
No,
Yeah,
that
because
you're thinking about Baylor.
no
That's
no no
Baylor and
no.
Utah.
This is also not a conference game as well. Yeah, it's not a conference game because this is leftover. This isn't the Kansas State game is not sorry a conference game.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
So
you're right.
when you're looking at that though, in terms of calculating whether Arizona's gonna win the Big 12, that's a different story, right? Because they don't have to play Kansas State and win that game in order to have a better chance of winning the Big 12. Now they may have to play them down the road, the championship game if they make it there, but I'm saying those are two different questions, right? So very interesting to think about. Very, very interesting to think about. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the over 8 wins. You can't you
Here's
can't push. You can't push. Got to pick over under.
Well, before I give you my answer, it does scare me the dynamics of this schedule. Now, I like that you don't
Hmm.
have any true back-to-back road games, right? You've got that bye in between weeks 3 and 4 at Kansas State, at Utah. But if you're telling me like your toughest games on your schedule, right, outside of Texas Tech and West Virginia, who I think are in the top half of the Big 12, I mean, at Kansas State, at Utah, at UCF, at TCU, those are teams I do not want to play on the road. Um, Especially with maybe a questionable defensive line. Although I'd be remiss if we didn't mention Kevon Darton, who comes over from Syracuse. I know Dino Babers on the other side of the ball, but at least you have some familiarity there. He could be a good player for Arizona this year. But UCF runs football well. TCU, is going to run the football well.
Hmm.
BYU, Utah physicality, Kansas State with Avery Johnson and Giddens. They're gonna have to win some games, man. But it's a good team, and Brent Brent is a good play. Oh, I'm gonna
I'll add
go.
one more. I'll add one more point. No Fafita, right? Shorter quarterbacks. You're gonna struggle when you get interior pressure, right?
Yeah,
I'm not seeing a ton of teams in this list on the schedule that are going to be able to do that. I know you talked about teams like Kansas State and Utah. I believe will be able to apply interior pressure, but other
UCF,
than that,
Lee
okay,
Hunter, John
okay, yep,
Walker.
I, yep, I guess, but really, I mean, like they could have pulled
That's a
Iowa State. They could have. I mean,
that's a
there are
great point.
other. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
That's a great point. Yeah, listen, I'll go over it just because I I just I think 8-4 is like an outcome, the most likeliest outcome. But if you tell me that you have a coach I trust, right, Brent Brennan, and a quarterback I trust, and Fafita, you benefit of the doubt. They're going to win these close games that are going to be on the road. Let's go. Let's go over. So 9-3, and you're looking at depending which games you win and lose, right? If it's that Kansas State game, if not, or if the other conference games, right in the thick of it, which we expect them to be right in the thick of it of Big 12 conference, um, conference race, and then therefore the college football playoffs as well.